The wind at the top of the wall had a way of finding every seam. It pried at fur and mail, worried its fingers under leather and wool until a man felt flayed and hollowed, a pipe for the cold to sing through. John walked there because the height steadied him. Down in the courtyards of Castle Black, the talk was loud and muddled, the clatter of buckets and the rang of the bellows and the quarrels that never ended. Up here the world grew simple. Ice and sky and the long blue shadow thrown eastward by that impossible face of frozen stone. Ghost padded beside him, a pale wraith leaving no print, and when the wind rose the direwolf narrowed his red eyes and leaned against John's thigh as if to share his weight. Snowfields reached away to the north, broken by black stands of pine and the white gleam of frozen streams. The far distance held a hazy smudge like smoke or cloud or a memory that refused to settle. Beyond that lay all they feared to name. He did not bring a cloak to the top. If you walked long enough, the frost took your lungs and set you blinking tears. That hurt, and the hurt cleared his head. Better? Dolorous Ed asked when John came down at last, his cheeks raw as butcher's scraps. Ed had 2 logs over his shoulders and a look that suggested the logs had slighted him. For now, John said. Good, Ed said. I thought the wind would talk you out of the work we've to do. Then I'd have to go down there alone with a rope, and I've never been fond of being alone where things are likely to pull me apart. They had ropes and torches and a wooden chest with iron corners that Ed hated with special care. It was heavier than it looked and had a habit of jumping at the wrong stones. John took one end and they lugged it across the yard toward the old well that no one used, the one capped in a ring of cracked stone and iron. 2 more men waited there, Satin with a coil of pitch-tarred line draped across his chest, and Leathers, the big free folk with his hair worn back and braided with bits of bone. Torches? John asked. Dry as a septon's bed, Ed said, prying open the chest to show bundled oiled cloth, pitch, flint. Leathers touched the well cap with his knuckles. No one goes to the night fort without a story following him back, he said, as if that made this well part of that ruin. My mother said there are places that remember. Then we will remind them whose we are, John said. It's only stone. That's what a fool says to the sea, Leathers muttered. They took the cap aside and fixed the rope. The first breath rising from below was stagnant and damp, smelling of old water, cold stone, and something sour at the root of it all, like a cellar where apples have rotted in the dark. Ghost peered over the lip, ears pricking forward. He looked a while, and then he looked at John, and what was in that look was not fear but a question John could not parse. He went first. The rope creaked over stone as he descended, boots searching slick irregularities in the well's throat. He had done this as a boy, the climbing and swinging, but then it had been the interface of the wall, all ladders and iron pegs and shouting. Here there was only breath and slickness and his own weight. Drops struck his face. He held the torch high. The circles of stone passed and passed, and then the shaft widened and he swung free above a hollow with black water pooled to one side and a floor of irregular flagging. Drop, he called softly. Ed's humor did not follow him down. The chest came next, lowered on a second line, then Satin grinning and Leathers glum. They set torches and the place took the light badly, as if the stone wanted to drink it. Their footfalls made different sounds on different flags. In one corner, the mortar had slumped away, and roots had insinuated themselves like white worms. The night fort cellars, Satin murmured, although they were under Castle Black. Hot Pie told me how the night fort kept a man in a soup kettle and fed him his toes. Hot Pie told you many things, Ed said, and most of them were unfit for hearing. Where to, my lord? Not my lord, John might have said in another life. Now he did not. He took a breath until his ribs ached and the damp was inside him. He was Lord Commander because there was no one else the wall would have. Choices shrank here. The cold stripped you to your vows. This way, he said. He had walked under Castle Black's foundations before, the old wormways where coal had been stored, where mushrooms sprouted waxy in the light of a blade-thin candle, where forgotten tools rusted into lumps. But this way was different, though he could not say why. Pulled at him. If he closed his eyes, he could feel it as a slope beneath his feet, not down or up but toward. Ghost moved ahead, tail out, then ghosted back when the corridor narrowed where a seam in the bedrock twisted and pinched. They came at last to a place where the stone was not regular tool-cut block but bedrock itself. The ceiling stooped to make them duck, then dropped farther so they crawled on hands and knees along a shelf above a choked channel where dark water oozed between spines of limestone. Their torches made the mineral teeth glisten. One tooth was black glass. Leathers reached for it and John slapped his hand away. "Volcanic," Satin said knowingly, as if that advised caution. His torch smoked. "Like that place to the south. The isle with the castle and the tunnels." "Dragon." "Say not the name," Leathers muttered. "Say not the name," Ed agreed. "On account we're under a great heap of ice, and whoever lives under ice dislikes the smell of fire." John wriggled forward. The shelf widened. The stone changed under his palms to something with a nap to it, a peat softness that was not peat. He lifted his hand and the skin held a dust the color of bone. He had the sense of entering a throat. The ceiling dropped once more. Then the rock fell away and they were in a chamber with a roof so low it made the light feel heavy, as if it had weight now and might be set down and broken. Three things took the eye. In the floor, a basin chiseled into the stone and lined with obsidian chips arranged in small petals, dark-lipped and glossy in the torchlight. Around the basin, 3 stools made from roots that had grown into seats and then been cut free of their parent. And on the far wall, half collapsed by old settling, a web of roots that might once have been a small tree that had pushed its way in and died here, leaving pale timber like bone ribs. "Someone sat here a long time," Ed said softly. "Someone with thin legs." Leathers knelt by the basin. He ran a finger along one obsidian petal and hissed when a sliver bit him. He put his finger in his mouth and then made a face and spat. "Tastes like coins," he said. "Old ones." Satin set a torch in a crack and the chamber leaped, shadows bending as if at a word. John stood very still. The root web on the wall was not random. It made a shape if you softened your gaze. Not a creature, not truly, but he could see wings if he told himself to. A long neck and a long tail, and the space between that was all wall, vertical and cruel. The profile of that ice cliff that haunted men's dreams who lived in warmer lands. On his left, the stone bulged and a trickle of water ticked, and that sound plucked at him the way a harp string is plucked. A boy in Winterfell had learned to stand in the godswood where the heart tree's face watched the pool. He would stand very still and tell himself that the slow ripple of leaves was some old god breathing. His father had told him the old gods were the trees and the stones and the stream, and he had believed because there had been quiet enough in the north to hear that. Here he heard it again, and he heard other things at the edge of hearing. A whir of wings that were not wings, a suggestion of scales on stone, a soft hiss like sap rising in spring though spring had long since fled. "What is it?" Satin asked. "Older than any of us," John said. Leathers looked at him. "You knew this was here." "Not like this," John said. "But I knew there was something." It had started with a sheaf of cracked parchment Sam had found months before in a cellar that had belonged to some long-dead builder. The pages were in the script of the first men, all solids and notches, alternating with a flowing hand that might have been Old Giscari or some Valyrian offshoot. "All knowledge is a road with branches," Eamon had said once, and John had carried those words under his ribs since the old man's ship slipped north toward Eastwatch and never came again. Sam had labored with charcoal and lamp oil and his patient mouth while John had listened to the groaning in the wall at night and the far barks of the dead. Some of the words in the parchment they could not get at all, as if they had been written sideways through time. But 2 lines Sam had sounded out as if they had always lived in his tongue. "If the wall is to sing again, it must be taught the tune of fire, not fed." "Taught? Why bring us?" Ed asked. "No offense, I'm very brave with a bucket, but anything that teaches the wall to sing is above my pay." "You listen," John said. "You tell me if it lies." Leathers snorted. "Stones do not lie. Men lie. Stones keep." John knelt by the basin. Ghost breathed at his shoulder, warm stink of meat. The obsidian bits had been pressed in by patient fingers, not set with mortar. their edges made tiny teeth. He ran his glove lightly over the rim, found 3 notches equidistant on the circle, and felt the tips of his fingers buzz as if he had set them to a window in a gale. 3. There were 3 stools. There were 3 great castles along the wall. The world liked its numbers. He drew his glove off and put his bare palm to the basin's rim where 1 notch was. The bite was immediate, so small he would not have noticed without the warmth that followed. A spreading heat that came not from fire but from recognition. As when you met a horse's eyes and saw that it had already summed you. Ghost's whiskers brushed his wrist. The torchlight fluttered and steadied again. He took his hand away. A dark bead welled where the obsidian had kissed him. It sizzled when it fell, and the sound was a note, pure and short, and it hurt his teeth for the way it wanted to go on. It swallowed. "I heard that." "So did I," Satin whispered. "I heard it in my jaw." Leathers's eyes had gone far away. "Old places remember," he said, not unkindly. "And they like to be remembered aloud." John lifted his head. The web of roots on the far wall had taken on a faint sheen as if wet. At the chamber's ceiling, stone was not stone but grown around something that had once breathed. He saw it then, under the low roof where the rock drooped, an oval of older wood, not root but heartwood, pale as fat and scored in a pattern that could be writing if writing were grown rather than carved. His breath fogged. He stood. He did not think he would name what he did next to prayer, but he had the sense that if his father were here, he would have approved of him for finding a way to be quiet. He put his forehead to the pale wood. Cold, yes, and the scent of damp like old cloth in a chest. Also sap, thin, faint, a memory of summer. The places the wall had sewn shut had beginnings outside men's reckonings. John let his breath slow and his mind slow with it until the hammering in his ears went from drum to pulse to a thread. When he had lived at Winterfell, he had stood very still sometimes until the Godswood's quiet had crept under his skin. The way fog had crept up from the pools on certain mornings. He tried to be that still now. He felt the tree the way a man with no hands might feel rain on his face. When the voice came, it did not come to his ears. Came to a place nearer the bones. "This is the wall we raised," it said, and when it said we, it meant things that grew with their feet in the dark and their mouths full of leaves. We set stone on stone and word on word. Cold was our mortar. Oaths were our nails. Men stacked the blocks. Men beat the mud with their heels and hauled on the ropes. Men ate their appetites into the work and left their breath in the joins. But we braided the words. They were ours when they left us, and they have thinned. John did not pull back. He thought very deliberately. "I hear you. You hear because your ears are many," said the thing that had grown the words. "You hear with teeth and fur and with a name the South made for you that is a lie and also a road." "Bastard," it said without moving its mouth. The word did not have the shape of insult here. It had the shape of a hinge. "What must I do?" he thought. The note the basin had made still vibrated in his jaw. "You must not do it wrong," said the voice, and something like a laugh ran through the roots. Some of the black chips in the basin reflected a different flame now, blue where they had been orange. "Not wrong. We taught men a way. They were to bring a winged fire and teach it a new sky, not to feed the wall with it, to teach." Teach, he thought. "If you pour a river into a thirsty field all at once," said the voice, "you drown the grain and wash the soil from its bed. No, not poured, not a sacrifice. The wall is a harp with strings of ice. Fire must be drawn over it as a bow. 3 places, 3 hands, 3 breaths. The dragon must put down its head to listen. Part of its flame must learn to answer when the wall speaks. Then when the cold ones come with their little blue names for stopping, the wall will sing and the song will be too much." John's mouth had gone dry. He swallowed. "There are no dragons," he said aloud, and Ed made a small protest at hearing the word. The laughter in the wood was softer now, like twig ends tapping glass. "There are. Not near. Not now. We know because the birds know. We borrowed a wing one day when a man burned a candle made from a black stone, and we followed the heat along a thread thin as spider silk across half a world. It tasted of the old hills that are not here." 3. One black, one green, one like a dying ember that will live if it is fed meat and song. Distant heat traveled down the bones of his forearm and into his palm where the obsidian had tasted him. He saw, for a heartbeat only, a girl no older than Arya had been when she wanted to throw knives and play with boys' games. But this girl did not look at him. Her eyes looked inward as if listening to something very loud. Her hair played like soot in a wind he did not feel. In her hands was a chain, and on the chain a sigil with a three-headed beast. Behind her loomed a dark form larger than any hall at Winterfell. His breath came sharp. Ghost pressed against him as if to steady him, and the heat slid backward and left him cold. 3, the roots said again. 3 places. 3 breaths. At the place where the sea is eaten by the ice, where the watch keeps the shards of ships. At the middle where the gates still remember a face. At the western end where the wall dives into the mountains and the stones remember giants pounding drums. There you make the wall sing its 3 notes. There the dragon will answer. The notes must be taught in a night under a moon without name. The dragon must drink from the 3 basins. Not blood, breath. The hands must be true. The vow must be said. What vow? Jon asked, still not moving. His neck ached. He felt the press of his forehead chill the skin there. Not your vow, said the voice. Not the vow men taught one another so their hearts would be trapped properly. You will say an older thing, and it will cost you, boy with many ears. What will it cost? He said. His words made the torchlight jump. Satin had backed to the wall, hand on his knife, which would be as much use here as a comb to a fish. The roots did not answer with words. Instead, they showed him a thing that was not sight. He felt himself stand in a courtyard where snow fell so slowly each flake could be watched from the moment it left the sky to the moment it kissed stone. He lifted a sword he knew too well. He set its point to his belly just above the navel and breathed. He spoke, and the air turned white in front of his mouth with that speaking, and all his brothers watched with faces. Some hungry, some miserable, some blank. Bowen Marsh had tears on his cheeks, and they streaked his face clean in 2 long lines. Jon watched himself take his oath, and then the vision he was had to place his palm on ice where the Black Gate lived and say its words too. The cost was simple. It was that when you set a new oath on your heart, all the old ones rearranged themselves. Some loosened, some bit deeper. One might slip from the hook altogether. Your life was not entirely your property after. That was the cost. Not his death, though his death might come as easily as a splinter in winter. The cost was stranger. The cost was that the wall would know his name a different way. I have no wish to be named more than I am, he said hoarsely. It is not a wish, said the roots mildly. It is a door. The wind will blow it open whether you hold it or not. Better to set the hinge yourself. Ed took a step forward. I don't like it, he said. The weirwood told my lord all that? Leathers made a sign over his chest that might have been some then warding. He spoke none for a while, but his face looked like a man lifted a pail from his shoulders and found it chained to a wagon. Jon lifted his head at last. The cold on his brow stung. The pail would have left a faint imprint on his skin, lines he could feel if not see. His knees ached where he crouched. He stood and looked at the basin again. The cut his palm had made had already closed. He could not say the room was brighter, but it seemed to hold rounding places that had been edges a moment ago. We go back, he said. We seal this and we tell no one but Samwell Tarly. Samwell Tarly is in Oldtown, a far and fair place, Ed said mournfully. Full of books and men who will look down their noses at our dear Sam until he's but a pair of boots left in a corridor. He will write to me, Jon said, and before that, he told me enough. Enough to do what? Leathers asked. Jon drew a breath. He kept his voice low. Enough to understand that the old words are instructions and not simply the tales of men with better memories. There is a ritual, Leathers. There are 3 basins like this one, if we are right, set at 3 places along the wall. The obsidian drinks a taste of a thing. The weirwood holds a direction. The dragon gives its breath. The wall binds it. Binds a dragon? Satin's eyes shone with the kind of faith only a Bravusi squirrel blade could have. Like tethering a hawk? Like teaching a hawk to return when a cry is sounded, John said. Not chain, not slaughter. The wall may need a friend with wings. I think the children made a way. Men do not teach dragons much, Leather said. They are too old for that. But the wood said teach. It did, John said. They left the chamber the way they came, setting torches back in the chest, erasing their passing as much as they could. Ghost lingered at the rim of the basin, head cocked, and then joined them with a sigh. When John looked back once more before he crawled into the narrow, the root web seemed darker, as if the little light they had brought had encouraged it to withdraw whatever of itself it had risked. The climb up the well was harder, not for weariness but because everything he passed seemed meaningful now. Each handhold, each notch a note in some long song. He had the wild thought that if he set his palm to the right stones in the right order, he could make a sound like that pure ringing the basin had made, and the wall would answer. He had to shake himself once in the dark to be sure he would not try it. They capped the well. Ed looked at John and then looked at the wind and shook his head as if the wind had disappointed him very particularly. What if Stannis hears there's a great work to be done with fire? Ed asked. He will want his red woman to advise. She won't touch this, Leather said quickly. Her kind burns the parts the old kind leaves. John raised his eyes to the wall. It loomed, facets catching a weak wash of sun that could not do more than make the ice look polished. Melisandre sees only her god in every spark, he said. I will not have her make a pyre of the wall because she thinks her flames must eat everything they see. This is not for her. You think she does not already know there's a thing under her feet? Ed asked. I think she knows many things and few of them properly, John said. There is more power in silence than she would believe. That night, sleep came late. His chambers were spare. A rough trestle for a table and a rougher bed. A shutter that did not shut cleanly against the northern draft. Ghost lay curled with his nose tucked under his flank and his breath going in a long, steady pump. John sat with the cracked parchments laid out by his elbow and his knife and a candle made not of tallow but of some sour-smelling wax satin, had traded from a pentoshi on a ship that came up from White Harbor. He traced the notches and hooks of the first men's hand with the point of the knife without touching the page, the way a man might trace the bones of his own hand through the skin. He had wanted for years to turn his face toward things he could name, orders and rations and the cost of grain and the laying of stones in a straight line. He had wanted to leave behind the way his skin sometimes did not feel like his alone. He had not gone into the Godswood at Winterfell to pray so much as to stand with a thing that did not ask for his name. That had been a comfort. Now the world wanted him to have 1,000 names and to remember them. He drifted at last, and the dreams took him quick as frost. He stood under the wall's eastern foot where the sea never entirely froze. The floes were stubborn black lips gnashing quietly at the shingle. Far out, a slow white line rolled like a sleeping thing turning over. The moon above was a thin shard and had no name because the air could not hold names at that cold. He heard a breath that was not his and turned. Behind him, the ice rose blue as old glass. Yet inside it, like flies in amber, shapes moved, not trapped, teaching. His palm ached, and when he looked down, the little slice the obsidian had made glowed faintly in the dream. A stair ran up the wall. He climbed, and with each step he heard notes, 3 and then again 3. When he came to the top, there stood a creature as long as the wall was tall, its hide drinking the light. It lowered its head, and its eye met his eye, and in it, he saw a boy playing a harp while snow fell on black hair. Each note a shard that fell into water and made the water remember a summer that had died before men did. The dragon breathed. The breath was not fire yet. It was the promise of fire, the soft sound bellows make when the smith has not yet opened the mouth of the furnace. He lifted his hand and set it under that warmth, and the wall sang. It was a low note, deep as earth. He woke with the sound in his bones. The next day letters came from Eastwatch, written in a cramped hand that had frozen once and learned to be cautious. The sea had pushed a raft of ice to the foot of the cliffs and left it there, and the men on the heights had seen shadows move upon it that did not belong to gulls. Tormund had sent a rag to wrap the letter. The rag smelled like smoke and salt and the stale breath of men who had gone without meat too long. Tormund's hand sprawled blunt and hot across the page where he'd taken the quill. He called Jon a crow and a brother and a fool and asked if he had any plans to share besides standing on walls and chewing regrets like old leather. "The cold ones walk the sea," Tormund wrote. "I do not know how to fight the sea." Jon folded the letter and washed his face with water from a pail so cold it burned. He felt old and not old. He looked at his hands. They were cracked and nicked, a man's hands, a soldier's. Beneath them something else had been placed by the day in the chamber. He could feel it like a plank laid across two barrels. If he stood on it, he could go from one to the other without touching ground. He did not know where the other barrel stood. He sent for Leathers and Ed and Maester Mullen. He sat them at his table and told them a braid of truths with a few of the harder knots left out. "There are 3 places along the wall that may require work," he said. "We must make ready to travel to each. We must do so without drawing every eye. Men will always find the old wells or the bone-strewn cellars more interesting than haulage if you tell them there are stories under their feet. We will tell them instead there are rotten barrels in the old wormways that must be hauled out before the thaw. And we will take the men we trust to keep quiet. Gren would have done, if well." Ed's mouth tugged down as if the memory pulled at it from underneath. He nodded once. "And you must send for Othel Yarwick," Leathers said. "If you want to make a thing sing, you must ask the man who knows how to plane wood until it sings." "Othel knows wood." "Othel knows wood," Jon agreed. "And Donal Noy would have known iron. But—" He let the rest slip away. "The wall taught you to do that. It saved you sometimes." "I will write to Cotter Pike," he said, tapping Tormund's letter. "I will ask the wildlings camped near Eastwatch to send word if the sea itself returns a song. We will go there first. There is a basin to be found, if we read the old pages properly." "And if you read them improperly?" Ed asked. "Then we will play at Rotten Barrels for 2 days and return, and I will tell you I fought a barrel and lost." They smiled without much humor. The wind whistled at the shutter and found the gap and came through with a finger. Ghost lifted his head and sneezed. Late that afternoon, Bowen Marsh came to Jon's door with a face like curdled milk. He bobbed a bow that was not a bow and stood with his hands tight in his sleeves. "There are matters," Marsh began, and Jon braced himself for the litany of short rations and quarrels among the free folk huddled in their new camps and grievances about the distribution of meat. The litany came, and Jon answered it the way a man answers a sore tooth, by worrying at it and then leaving it alone when there is nothing better to be done. Marsh's eyes slid everywhere in the room but to Jon's. It was the same every day now, the small harryings. They had that in common, Bowen Marsh and the wind. When Marsh left, Jon stood a long moment with his hand on the latch, the cold with leaching heat from his palm. He thought of telling Bowen Marsh the truth. He thought of seeing the man's face when he said dragons and knew he would see pity and disgust, both for different reasons. He took his hand from the latch and turned back to his table. That night he walked again in dream to the chamber under the world. He knew the way as if he had made it. Ghost went before him in the dream, and his paws did not touch the stone, and the torchlight was not flame but a kind of moon. The basin was full now with a darkness that was not water. He leaned and breathed, and his breath made faint ripples that became rings, and the rings made notes, and the notes stirred the pale wood. He felt watched. He looked back. In the narrow he had crawled through to enter the chamber, something turned and was gone. A shape like a boy stepping around a corner and not wanting to be seen and failing not to be seen anyway. "Bran," Jon said, and his voice sounded human and very small. The thing in the passage craned its head, and where its face should be there were eyes. His brother's eyes, but older than any man's. A raven was perched on his shoulder. Something in the little bird's beak glittered dark, and it made a sound that was almost speech. "You must not wake it wrong," the boy said. The raven's head bobbed 3 times in agreement, precise as a man setting nails. "Teach, not feed." "I know," Jon said. "Do you?" the boy asked. He sounded far and near at once, like a voice carried on a metal string. John opened his hands. I know only that it must be done by night under a moon without a name. I know there are 3 places. I know. That it will cost? The boy asked, and his mouth quirked in a way that made John see, for a heartbeat, the boy who had clambered after him on the broken towers at Winterfell. You have always paid your prices, John, even when they were not yours. Whose are they, then? John asked. The boy tilted his head. The raven hopped to the other shoulder, then to the other again. The walls, the norths, the livings, old names, names that do not fit well in one mouth. Be careful whose words you speak when you stand under the ice. It listens. It repeats. How do I begin? John asked. The boy nodded at the basin. Bring it a breath that has learned the shape of flame. Show it the places. Teach your mouth for the vow. When you are ready, the dragon will hear you because you will be loud, John. So loud. The dream went to pieces as dreams do, and the last thing he held was the feeling of a small hand in his. That woke a tenderness that frightened him. For there was no time in the world now for tenderness unless you pushed it through narrow places and risked having it scraped away. The next days were all work. The word about rotten barrels went out with little enthusiasm, and the men grumbled but obeyed. Othel Yarwick eyed John like a carpenter eyes a strange tree. If you want old wood out, Othel said, it will break if you do not prop what it holds. Even rotten wood holds more than a man thinks. Pull it and you pull down the roof if you're not careful. Prop, pull, replace, John said. Careful, quiet. They went down into wormways and out again with true rotten barrels, and they found rats that had never seen the sky and made small order. John took men he trusted to the empty tower nearest the little woods north of the kitchens and showed them a seam in the floor that hid a shaft. They descended with ropes and torches and scuffed their way along a second throat and found a second chamber, not like the first but cousin to it. A basin with dark petals, a root grown hard as iron to make an arch, a feeling that the air there was turned sideways. He marked the notch in this basin with a bit of iron nail. He told no one why it mattered. 2 mornings later a raven came from Eastwatch that had a feather caught between wing and body and would not come off, and John took that for a sign as childish as an old woman's bones, because he needed one. Cotter Pike's hand said the ice had sloughed away and left the shingle bare and the sea was hungry. Also that a man swore he saw a set of footprints walking up from the water and go out across the pebbles and vanish at the high tide mark as if some giant had taken 3 steps and flown. I do not like things that leave by air, Cotter wrote. Send me meat and men. John read and folded the letter and burned it. He sent a different one back. He asked Cotter to send 10 men to the old cave near the headland where the cliff bit out into the water like a broken tooth. We are looking for a cistern shaped like a bowl. It will be strange. When you find it, do not put your hand in. Wait. He had Satin carry that letter to the Ravenry and wait until the bird was sent. When the boy was gone, John sat with his hands on his knees for a long time because it is a terrible thing to tell men to go and find a monster they cannot see. The kettle began to whistle on the brazier. He stood and poured the water and thought about how vows change shape when new words are put near them. He thought about a moon with no name. The nights came quick now and blew out like lamps. In the darkest of them, he went again to that first chamber with Ed and Leathers, carrying only 1 torch to make them small. He put his palm to the basin and let the obsidian take a new kiss. He did not flinch at the sting. The note rang when the blood fell, and this time he listened not with his ears but with his teeth, and it was different, lower at first, then climbing a little, then back. It had found something to speak to, tasted of brine. When they came out, the wind was whipping across the yard and flaying the flags they had left set out to dry. Snow piped along the roofs in a fine gray stream, and the moon hung above the world like a shard that had been chipped off a larger knife. Not named, not naming. He drew his cloak about him and went to his rooms and shut the door and stood with his back against it because the room sometimes felt like the boat he did not own on a sea he had never sailed. He slept a little and woke with the memory of the dragon's breath on his hand and the sound of the wall answering. He went to the shutter and set it close as it would go. Ghost rose and stretched and put his head in John's lap as if to keep him from floating up off the floor and out the crack. In the candle's guttering little world, he whispered words that had come to him in the dream, not to test them, not to own them, to learn their feel on the tongue. They tasted of sap and iron and smoke. He spoke them as quietly as he dared. When he was done, he blew out the candle, and the dark settled around him like a hand laid over a frightened thing's eyes. He slept at last because there was nothing else left to do. On the morrow, with the light pale as watered milk and the frost on the eaves soft as fur, he went to the top of the wall with Ed and Leathers and 3 others and looked east and west. The world was a harp strung with roads and rivers and freezing air. He felt the note he would strike. He felt it in the bones of his face where the wind had gnawed him thin. There were hours yet before he could send men to Eastwatch without notice. There were grievances to hear and spoiled meat to discard and pack animals to schedule. He went and did these things because to stand and stare into a fate would make any man stupid. He saw Bowen Marsh again and saw the man's mouth nip like a miser counting small coins. He saw Othel Yarwick look at the beams in the new barracks the builders had raised and be satisfied he had done a thing for the living. He watched a boy and a man throw snowballs behind the mess hall, and he watched the boy miss and the man laugh too hard and then stop laughing too fast. He signed 2 orders and struck out a 3rd and felt the world hinge inside him. Later, near dusk, he went to the stables. The air there was hot with the smell of dung and hay and animal honest smells. Rattleshirt's stolen mare thrust her head at him as if to bite and then nuzzled his shoulder when he did not flinch. He ran a hand along her neck. Leathers came and stood with his arms over the stall rail and looked at him without speaking for a long time. "The old rights make men small," Leathers said at last softly. "That's how they keep their size. You go under them and you feel yourself paired. It is good. It is not good. You will be held, Lord Crow." John nodded. "I have been held before." "Not like this," Leathers said. His mouth twitched. "Bread rises different in a stone oven than on a stick over fire. You eat both and live. But your teeth remember." They went to the yard and the wind met them. Somewhere north the dead learned patience and taught it to their legs. Somewhere east a storm built itself out of idle air and plans that the air did not know it had made. Somewhere south a girl with soot hair listened to a voice only she could hear and tried to teach a dragon a word in a language no man had ever owned. In the west the sun fell and dragged the sky after it like a cloak. John set his hands on the cold stone of the nearest Merlin and leaned his weight there until the stone had to take the burden. He did not speak. He did not move. When he finally pushed away, the imprint of his palms remained as a patch of frost that had gone to water and back to frost again. He looked at that mark and thought, the world sometimes keeps what you set on it. Some hours after dusk, with most of the watch sunk into their cups or their blankets, John walked the inner ward and down the old stair behind the rookery and along the narrow that led to the well. He felt watched and knew he was. A shadow detached from the angle of the old smithy and became Melisandre. Her red hair dragged the wind behind it like a fringe. Her eyes were embers banked. She smiled the way people smile who think they see through you. "You go under," she said. A statement that waited to be made prophecy. "Under is good. Under is where the heat is kept." John halted. "There is only ice under us," he said. "In the deeps of ice, fires dream," she said. "If you would pull one up, call me." "I will not," he said. She smiled again, the same smile, and drifted away trailing warmth as a fire dies. He watched the patch of frost his palm had left on the Merlin in his head. He went to the well and found Ed already there with the chest and the torches, and Leathers with a wrapped bundle with 3 small hammers and 3 nails of black iron. "Rotten barrels," Ed said sadly. "Rotten barrels," John agreed. They lowered the torches into the throat of the well and the light went down into the root of the world. Then they followed it. The old place waited, and when John pressed his palm to the basin again and gave it his taste, the note that answered was pure as the ring a blade makes when a smith finds its quenching, and it sent a shiver down the long body of the wall. He felt the shiver under his boots as if he stood on a great animal that had just been called by its name. "Do you hear?" Satin whispered from where he stood, struck small. "We will all hear soon enough," John said. He straightened and set his hand, now blood-pricked, on the pale oval of wood grown in the ceiling. The cold soaked him to his teeth. He closed his eyes. Quiet rose as if poured. He said the first word of the old vow and felt it settle into him like a nail tapped once, perfectly, into the right grain. He did not say the rest. Not yet. The old places liked to be courted. He had learned that at Winterfell without knowing he had learned it. "We go east first," he said into the quiet that had formed, and the quiet carried the words into the wood and into the stone and into the ice. "When the moon is the shard of a knife, when it has no name." "Rotten barrels," Ed sighed. "I always hated the taste of knives." Jon laughed under his breath, quiet and real and exhausted, and the sound he made did not echo. It sank, found its level like water, and it stayed. He would sleep little. He would write before dawn and send the bird when the sky went from black to the color of bone. He would keep Leathers near, and he would let Ed complain until the words wore smooth and bright like river stones. He would keep his hands busy enough to stop them from shaking. He would plan for the 3 notes. He would teach himself a new mouth. Outside, the wind leaned its shoulder on the world, and the world held. The wall shifted in its old bed and remembered a tune. Jon stood with his hand on the old wood in the dark and felt the memory flex. And for the first time in many days the cold did not find the seams in him quite so easily. They left before dawn in a hush that made even the horses pick their feet as if stepping over sleeping things. The sky over the wall wore a bruise in its eastern corner where light would come, and the air had that thin, biting taste that told of wind rising over open ground. Jon's party was small enough that their passing sounded like one man's business done several times rather than a column. Ed and Leathers rode near. Satin and 2 builders Othel had chosen for quiet followed with a sledge, its runners wrapped to keep them from squealing against hard-packed snow. They took the road south of the wall not for ease but for the way it swallowed travelers. Trees leaned in to listen and then forgot you at once. The long length of the wall to their left was a pale presence for many miles, like a man's ghost holding to a road he once walked in life. They saw tracks as the light came on. Hair flicks, fox stitchings, once the long, dragging line of a wolf's tail in snow.
No boat prints.
When they crossed the remains of an old camp, someone had left its fire-black stones in a ring and an iron spit half buried. Ed made a note of the iron like a septon marking a saint's bone. It would be fetched later when fetching did not call eyes you did not want. They did not speak much. When the sun finally managed a wash of color over the world, it was pale gold, more memory than heat. Men's breath made small banners. Jon kept the wall in the corner of his eye as if it might decide to wander. He had the feeling of being watched without malice. It was a careful gaze, like the way an old dog measures the boy who has grown in a season away and discovered a chin. Near noon they paused where the road ran in a shallow swale and the wind lost its teeth. They chewed at smoked meat that shattered when bitten and thawed on the tongue into something near food. Satin fussed at the sledge's lashings, then leaned against the runner with his eyes closed to steal a minute of sleep on his feet. Leathers spat into the snow and wiped his mouth with the back of his glove and said nothing for a long time. "When you go to pledge your old words under the ice?" he said at last, looking not at Jon but at the tree line. "Do you want us to speak with you? Some rites like one voice, some like a braid." Jon rolled a bit of fat on his tongue until its salt let go of his palate. He thought of the basin's note ringing his jaw, of the quiet that had turned in the chamber like a creature making itself comfortable on old bones. "A braid," he said, "if we can carry a tune between us." Ed sighed. "I sing like a bucket," he said, "but I can be quiet with the best, if that's the other part." They trudged on with the light slanting and then flattening as afternoon went icy. In places the road lifted and gave a view eastward where the land ran out in a thin line and the sky took over properly. In others it bent through clogged ravines where black pines crowded the snow and through long bars of shadow like a cage. Once they came upon 3 free folk moving the other way with their goods piled on a travois dragged by a woman whose wrists were rope-burned and raw. The man walked beside her with his mouth set, refusing the pity of reinforcements. Leathers called to them softly in their tongue. The man showed his teeth, not smile, and said a word that could be thank you or get away, and trudged on. By dusk the smell on the air changed. It thinned of tree and animals and took on something flat and enormous. The taste of salt came so faintly it could have been made up. The wall's eastern reaches caught a scrap of last light and turned blue of a depth that pulled at the eye, like looking into old glass. Eastwatch by the sea huddled against the world's end with its back to the ice and its face to the water. From a distance it looked smaller than a man remembered because the sea beyond it was so wide. Closer you saw the scars, broken teeth of timber where piers had been, a line of posts like rotten ribs driven into shingle, a signal tower that leaned as if tired. Smoke climbed from a handful of chimneys in narrow, stubborn lines. The gates were crusted with salt. Gulls walked the parapets with the entitled limp of hawkers. Cotter Pike met them at the yard with his arms already out in complaint. He was a narrow man strung like a bow, and his beard looked brined. You come without a word, and the word you did send was fishy as a sailor's story, he said, which was as warm as Pike got. The sea is a churchyard, and the dead walk on their own business. If you've brought me a cure for the sea, I'll take it, but if it wants feeding, we've got no meat to spare. John did not dismount until Pike had finished. When he did, he landed with his knees stiff from cold and the miles. No feeding, he said, keeping his voice down. I'll tell you what needs doing in my rooms. I do not go to your rooms, Pike said. Men see and men think thoughts that grow teeth. We'll talk in mine. Fewer candles. Less comfort. Nobody suspects sense happens there. Pike led them up a stair with salt ground into the steps. His room had the look of a ship's cabin dragged ashore. Low ceiling, a table shoved into a corner as if waves still jostled its legs. He shoved a tin cup along the table at John, and another at Ed. Drink, he said. It's like kissing a very old salt cod, but it warms parts a man misses. The drink went down with a sting that felt medicinal if you lied to yourself enough. John let it coil in his belly. He told Pike enough. He spoke of old instructions grown into wood and stone, of 3 basins and 3 places, and a song the wall had not sung in an age. He did not say dragon aloud. He did not say vow the way his mouth wanted to say it. He said breath. He said note. He said teach. Pike listened with his chin tilted at a small, insulting angle, as if he reserved the right to call everything piss at the end. When John stopped talking, Pike put his fingers on the tabletop and drummed once. I've watched men go mad of cold and think it was seeing God, Pike said. I've watched men go mad of the water moving always and think it was a woman calling their name. I've watched sober men put fire to the sea because they thought it would make it remember being friendly. This sounds like none of those and not enough like anything else. What do you need? I need the headland cave watched, John said. I need men there who will look and not touch, and bring us word when the tide falls low enough to show the bowl. I need hush. You get hush, Pike said. Men who came from ships learn hush or they don't live to grow loud again. And I sent 10 already because your letter smelled of something that wanted speed. You will say a day and an hour we go, Leathers said from where he stood at the door, big enough that the door looked like a small thing he might put on and take off. And the night you said the moon is not called any name. We will go in when the sea has left her teeth on the stones. It wants the moon to be less than itself, Ed said. That I can manage. I've had days like that. Pike grunted that he would have the tide man tell him when the sea would draw breath and leave the cave's throat bare. He looked at John a long time then, eyes like squinted slits that saw more than men thought. If this is folly, I'll call it mine, he said. I don't forgive easily, but I do claim. I found it steadier than praying. By night, the sea made itself felt in the walls and the floorboards. It sent a slow pressure into a man's bones, a weight and a lifting that never came to rest. John lay on a pallet he did not trouble to undress for and listened to gulls knifing their cries into the dark and men cursing softly below like prayer gone crooked. He slept in snatches and walked under the ice and along a ledge of black rock in the times between. In one of those snatches he came aware with a clarity that felt like pain. A boy in a wooden chair carved with antlers under roots, watching with eyes that were not full. You must not let her burn it, the boy said, and John knew Melisandre's name without the boy saying it and felt the old woman heat of her smile against his cheek like a brand placed just near the skin, not touching, making it ache anyway. He woke with his hand on his belt knife and Ghost's muzzle pressed to his arm and the sea working the stones outside. The Tide Man was a gray creature with fingers like a sieve and a voice that sounded full of shingle. He told them when the water would run from the cave as if chased, and he licked his lips between words as if they tasted of brine and he liked it. Jon thanked him and tried not to count his gratitude like coins. He met the 10 Pike had sent, men with faces burnt pale by salt wind, their eyes reddened at the corners. One had a scar across his nose like a piece of old rope had been laid there and forgotten. One whistled when he breathed through a broken tooth. They did not care what they were hunting as long as it was a thing that could be found. They went at dusk when the gulls had gone silent and only the plovers piped thinly along the edges. The headland was a broken knuckle of rock that had been punched and punched by the sea and healed badly. The path down was a zigzag gouged by men who had no time to make steps and less to make them safe. Every now and then the spray kicked cold into their faces from a wave that threw itself farther than the last. The wind came off the water with that flavor of long teeth in it. The cave mouth yawned where the rock split. In full tide the sea chewed at it. Now the water made itself small, sliding over slick rock ribs and falling away in thin waterfalls that made a sound like gossip in a hall after the Lord has left. The air had a mineral tang and the sweet rot of seaweed spread on stone. They pushed their torches into the dark. Firelight made the cave's ribs stand up and show their grained sides. The floor pitched and heaved in a way that made the legs ache. Water ticked and then lifted its voice when a wave found a tunnel and laughed down it and then hushed again. Far inside, where the cave bent, the torchlight caught on something that drank it rather than returned it, and it made the men draw breath as one. The basin here was deeper than the one under Castle Black, wider at the mouth and fluted at the lip so that it made small shadows like a shell's inner workings. Obsidian petals lined it thick enough that a careless hand could be cut 2 ways at once. The fluting made small channels that let water out after a wave had reached here in storms past. The edges of those channels shone like oil. Around the basin, the floor showed a ring where something had been set there and set there again in the same place so many times that even stone had learned the habit. There was no wood grown into this cave that a man could see. The roof here was black rock damp with the breath of the sea. But when Jon crouched, he felt the same quiet waiting that he'd felt in the chamber with the heartwood. The silence pressed at his back as if in approval that he had come with less light than he might have. They set their torches in chinks. The flame looked thin and embarrassed in that space. Ed stood with his head tilted like a man listening for a bird's call deep in a hedge and finding it. Leathers went to his knees without being told and put his palm out over the basin without touching. "It likes breath," he said softly. "It has been thirsty a very long time." Cotter Pike kept his distance, as if the basin were a well everyone in the village knew not to use. "Do we bleed it?" he asked, not without irony. "No," Jon said. He set his hand over the lip where the fluting made the shadows climb one another. He barely touched and sharpness kissed him on the meat of his palm and let go. The drop fell and the note came, not like the pure ring in the chamber under Castle Black but lower, as if the basin's throat were full of water and wanted to sing around it. The sound went into the rock, into Jon's jaw and spine, into the soles of his feet where they gripped the slimed stone. It ran away down corridors in the cliff like a boy running home with a word to tell. Ed's head jerked as if someone had spoken near his ear. "Again," he whispered. Jon bled another drop into the basin. The note returned, a shade higher now, as if encouraged. He felt the pull then, the strange sideways tug he had felt before, as if a door were opening in a direction no man named. He let himself be still. In his ribs something changed its mind from beating to listening. He did not take out the thing Leathers had wrapped in cloth and kept close because he did not want the sea or Cotter Pike to see him handle it more than he must. It had come with Tormund's people, a found thing that had fallen from a woman's arms when the sea had tried to keep her and she had not consented. They had given it to Jon as if giving away a hot coal. It was a candle of a sort, but hard and dark as if glass had learned to be stone and then changed its mind again. When he stroked it with a finger, it felt smooth and faintly oily. It stank of nothing. When he first set a flame to it back at Castle Black, it had not eaten the wick the way a candle should. The fire had been a small, cold thing that made more light in the mind than in the air, and he had thought then of Archmaester Eamon and the stories Sam told of candles that burned without consuming and let men see farther than sight. He took the black candle out now because the basin had asked without words. He set it to the fluted lip, not touching the obsidian petals, and he brought a torch near without letting the torch's flame kiss the candle's strange body. He breathed on it instead, slow and deliberate, until he felt foolish, until he felt tired, until the little cold wick within caught not flame but intention, and a thin, uncertain lucency rose like a thread the eye suspects and the teeth believe. The basin's note thickened and steadied, as if a companion had come to the choir and found his place. The men with the broken tooth and the roped nose shifted, as if in discomfort and relief at once. John leaned and put his mouth near the candle's small on fire, and spoke one word in the old vow that had grown in him like a splinter he would not take out. The word felt like sap and iron and something like wind through reeds. He did not know its meaning as men count meaning. He knew only how it bent the air. He said it once, a second time, the third. Something answered across a distance too large for the mind to make sensible. It did not come as a sound first, but as a change in pressure. The sea drew a deeper breath and held it, and the air in the cave drew a matching breath and held it too. Then the sound came. Not fire's roar, not a bell, not a whale's song, though it carried a little of all three. It was the sound a great thing makes when it realizes it is being spoken to. It slid down the candle like oil and found the basin and played on the obsidian petals so that they sang in three small, ascending notes. John closed his eyes not to see better but to keep from falling. In the dark behind his lids a girl stood with a chain in her hands and a beast behind her that had to fold its great wings because the space it had was too small for the truth of it. The girl's mouth moved with words he did not know. The beast's breath warmed the air. He reached, with a courtesy that felt borrowed from an older thing that had once taught wolves to come to a call and not to fear that call, and he asked for a cup of that breath. Not to eat, he said without speaking. To teach. To tie a song to a place that is older than either of us. He felt refusal and he felt curiosity, and then he felt a small, gruff permission like a hand lifted from a plate to let a child take a morsel. The candle brightened in a way that did not change the shadows. The basin filled not with water, not with light, with a gray, smoking coolness that made the teeth ache, as if a cloud had decided to be held by stone for a heartbeat. John leaned and exhaled, and the gray moved as if wanting to meet his breath halfway. He said the first part of the vow's first line, and he said the second part, and he stopped there as the roots had bid. He was not going to hurry an old thing. He set the flat of his palm lightly on the lip again, and the sharp kiss took what it needed and let go, and the basin made a lower note, satisfied. The wall answered. He felt it not in ear or jaw now, but in the soles of his feet and in his knees where old bruises had taught the weather. The sound ran through the cave and out along a channel men had not cut. It ran up under the cliff and through the rock and into the ice and along the ice as a hum. On the parapets at Eastwatch men looked at one another without knowing why and held their breath until they remembered to let it go. Out to sea, the long, slow line of moving white paused, darkened along one edge as if shadow and light had mislaid their places, and then rolled on. Farther, where no man could see, something turned its head. The 10 men Pike had sent stood with their mouths a little open, like boys listening outside a hall when someone plucks a harp string for the first time. Pike himself had not come down, because he had pride enough to stand watch above and leave the rest to the men he had chosen. Leathers's eyes were bright like a man after the first drink in a long dry month. Ed had a look of such deep, curious sorrow it made John want to take something heavy from his friend and carry it for a few steps. He did not blow the candle out because it did not behave as a candle behaved. He covered it with the cloth and it obeyed, the way an old dog obeys a gesture more than a word. He lifted the cloth and felt the small, residual cold of it through the rough weave and knew the thing would hold a little thread of its unfire as long as it needed to. He left it set on the basin's lip so that the next breath would know where to go. When they came up into night, the moon was the shard of a blade laid on dark, and men were quiet on the walls, as if remembering they had other mouths besides those they used to speak with. Pike's eyes found John's and did not ask. "Well?" he said, gambling and preparing to claim. "The wall knows the first note," John said. "The basin is full of borrowed breath, and it likes us. We'll hear it hum when the wind comes from the east. And the sea will do as it pleases," John said. "But it has heard a name said near it that it has not heard in a long while. Some things respect that." Pike grunted and shouldered his gaze away. He did not ask what the name had been because he was not a fool, and names, once known, work in men the way burrs work in wool. "If this is a song, it had better be a war song," he said. "I'm tired of lullabies that only wake dead men. They slept in bits and rags." John dreamed once, and the dream was so simple it scared him more than the ones with dragons and boys grown into trees. He stood on the ledge above that same cave with dawn making the sea dull pewter and a line of men walking along the shingle where no men should be, their feet sinking and rising without weight, their heads tilted toward the sound that wasn't wind. He woke with his hand already reaching and found Ghost there, and the white wolf pressed his heat into John's ribs and made a small sound like a question that expected no answer. The next day the wind did come from the east, and men standing on the parapet felt something in the stone under their boots, a low thrum that wasn't the sea and wasn't their own blood. It wasn't loud enough to make them see God. It wasn't soft enough to be ignored. Pike swore in a way that had more awe in it than salt and then pretended he had dropped. Ped something and bent to pick it up. They waited 3 days for a sky without name. On the first day Melisandre arrived at Eastwatch as if the wind had gathered itself into a woman and walked. She rode a small horse whose breath smoked and whose eyes showed white. Men found tasks elsewhere without being told. She found John without needing to ask. She found him on the sea-facing wall, his glove off, feeling the stone with the funny tenderness of a man feeling the brow of a child for fever. "Your ice sings," she said by way of greeting. "I told you the deeps of ice keep embers. There is no fire here that will eat anything," John said. "It has been taught otherwise." She smiled, and the smile was all approval and no joy. "There is no fire that does not eat," she said. "You cannot change what fire is. You can change what it hears," John said. "Words," she said, as if they were a thin broth. "Come the night, you will need more. Let me stand with you when you stand under the world. Let my God listen too. He is generous with his heat when men humble themselves." He watched the line of the horizon as if something might walk out of it with a proper answer to hand. "You may stand on the wall and warm yourself as you like," he said. "You will not come under. Your God knows how to burn. He has taught that trick to many. This will be something else." She watched him for a long breath. The wind played her hair and made it look like a flag that had forgotten its house. "You were dead once," she said softly. "Did you know? In one path you were dead on a table, and your wolf put his nose to your cold hand and whined. I would have called you back. I am only telling you this because it is the skin of the truth and not all its blood. I tell you men love skins because they can be wrapped and worn." He made himself not ask what lay under that skin. She left then, as if the conversation had ended at a place only she could see. He stood with his glove off until his fingers hurt enough to teach his mind its proper size again. When he put the glove on, he was careful not to have learned anything he did not want. On the second day, a band of free folk came down to the shingle to strip a wreck of what could be taken. Tormund was with them. His beard rhymed, his laugh even under this sky. He came up to the gate as if walls were a joke he allowed crows to tell. He gripped John in both hands and squeezed until bones remembered they were bones. "I hear your big white wall hums now," Tormund said. "It hummed last night while I was pissing and I jumped and pissed on my boot. That is not friendship, Crow." "It was saying a word it had forgotten," John said. Tormund squinted toward the sea. "There are old wives who say you can sing the sea to sleep," he said. "They are usually drowned, those wives. Do not sing it, then. It lies when it sleeps. Better to keep it awake and grumpy." That night, Cloud cut across the moon and bit it into a sliver small enough that men forgot it had ever been round. The tide man said the sea would draw far. The wind said yes, for once, to a plan made by men. John checked the black candle under its cloth and told himself he was not checking and wrapped it again. He gathered Ed and Leathers and the 2 builders who had learned the shape of quiet and took 5 of Pike's men. Tormund came unasked and unarguable. Satin came because he could slip like a shadow down a wet rock without dying half the times a man should die. His grin looked like a boy going to steal apples and finding the tree full of knives. Melisandre watched from the wall and let the red beads on her throat catch what little light there was and pretend it was theirs. They went down into the cave with less clatter than last time because men who had done a thing once knew where the rock grabbed and where it let go. The torches looked foolish. The candle did not. It woke when John breathed a single measured breath across its wick as a man wakes when his name is called under a blanket. Leathers knelt and touched the lip with the flat of his hand and hissed through his teeth. "It remembers," he said. "It kept our last visit under its tongue, and now it will speak it back." John set his hands on the stone. He called his mouth up into his head and into his chest. He said the first word up to the place where it had liked being. He said the second word to the place where it would like being next. He did not go farther. He did not rush the old thing. He leaned until his hair almost brushed the unfire, and he gave it his breath and took the borrowing the basin offered. That gray, smoking coolness that made his teeth nudger at his jaw like a horse examining a bit. And in the place that was not hearing and not sight, the answer came again. He had thought to feel reluctance or anger. He had not prepared himself for study. The same great head bowed. The same I watched, not him, but the place where the sound he made met a sound she knew. He saw the girl with soot hair lay her hand on the beast's muzzle and say something that was no language at all and all languages at once. He gave back the shape of that silence as best he could manage with a mouth made for meat and lies. The breath came. The basin drank. He spoke the first line in full up to the last syllable and let it sit there behind his teeth like a coin he might not spend. He felt Ed and Leathers and the builders and the to-be-claimed men fall into a kind of quiet that had weight. And he felt Tormund's scornful, generous watching like a blanket he had been thrown as a joke and found he needed. A tremor walked through the cliff. It felt like a beast turning in sleep. The wall hummed underfoot, and the hum went up into men's shins and settled in their hips and made their old injuries answer. The sea outside sucked and drew and stayed. In the mouth of the cave, in that table of dark where night pushed the little light back down the throat, something moved without moving, a small readjustment of dark on dark. John did not look there. He would not teach the dead that he knew how to fear. He kept his eyes on the basin, on the slow, patient cool that gathered at its throat and made small curls like a quiet pot. He felt the old words want to crease his tongue into the shape of the next line, and he did not let them. Not yet. He drew back. He covered the candle, and the knot flame obeyed with a courtesy it had refused last time. He stood with his palms spread on stone until the sting went from them and he could trust himself to close his hands around a rope and not drop it. He lifted his head. "We go," he said quietly. "Walk backward if you can. Don't turn your backs without thinking it first. If the wind tells you a story that sounds like your mother's voice, ignore it. It forgets endings." Tormund snorted. "My mother's voice sounds like a moose fell down a mountain and lived," he said. "I'll know it." The sea gave them space. The path up the headland was slick and tacky by turns. At the top, the moon wore a thin line like a cut that hadn't bled yet. Melisandre waited in her crimson like a coal left at the edge of a fire to bank until morning. Her eyes found John's face and flicked to the cloth he carried. "You handle a thing older than you with hands too young," she said. "It will bite you because it can, and then it will forgive you because you are trying. Next time it will not forgive." He had no breath for her. He kept moving until the wall was under his hand and he could bleed the tremor off into stone. The hum in the ice had settled to a quiet thing now, like a house settling after a wind. He put his forehead briefly to the stone and let that cold teach him the size of his heat. In the days that followed, men came to him with matters because that was the work that did not change even when the world changed around it. haulage, grain, the way a woman had struck another in a queue, and the way that needed settling with dignity for both or else with none for either, a boy who had stolen a length of rope because he liked the rope. He took these and they steadied him. At night he sat with the candle on his table under its cloth and did not uncover it. He spoke nothing aloud, and he spoke everything in his head and in his bones until he could feel the second line of the old vow sit in him with no wobble. A raven from the shadow tower came with a scrap that had been written on and then written over because someone had snatched the paper from the quill before the writer finished and then changed his mind. "Strange creaks in the stones by day," the note said, in ink blotched where the hand had stung. "Deep, like staircases settling 2 castles away." John sent riders to the middle place with orders that were whether talk and barrels talk on their face and something else in the mouth that delivered them. He drew a map in his head where 3 notes would fit if he laid them along the ice and thought about how a harp string answers its neighbor when plucked. He set Bowen Marsh to counting salt pork because Bowen Marsh liked to count and look over his counting into a future where nothing was wasted. He sent Othel Yarwick to check a beam in an old tower because Othel liked to know wood and the wall liked Othel's hands. He made ready for the second place, the gate with a face that remembered men. He would go by night while men drank or slept off the lack of it. He would take the candle. He would take Leathers and Ed and a boy with good feet and a man of pikes who did not mind the way caves speak. He would not tell Melisandre which night. He suspected she would know anyway, and he would find that out when Red moved where it should not. He would not let her name her god in a place where trees had spent all their words on stones. On the evening before the night that would be nameless, Bran filled his head so suddenly John had to grip the edge of the table to keep from standing. The boy stood under roots and looked out through birds' eyes and men's, and none of them at once. He seemed older and not older in the same way a river seems older when the ice frees it. "You must expect a hand," Bran said without moving his mouth. "A hand that is not a hand. It will reach for the candle. It will want to turn it to its god. Do not slap it. Hold it. Names make better knots than palms." John sat back slowly and felt ghosts sit with him. He breathed once. "If I hold it," he said, in the place where voices are without sounding, "what price does it ask?" Bran's eyes had that old man patience that made John's throat ache. "It asks to be called what it has been afraid to be since the fire caught it first," Bran said. "All flames are frightened at the start. Later they learn swagger and then they learn hunger. But first they are afraid. Call it small and generous. Call it flicker. Call it help. It will remember being something before eating, and it will let your hand set it where it should be set. And if I fail? If you fail, the candle will be a sword and you have enough swords. Teach it to be a string instead." The boy's mouth twitched, and for a heartbeat John saw the child who had fallen and laughed before he had cried because falling had surprised him into joy. "You always did better when you could hold something. Hold this." The presence went as if a hand had lifted off his head and his hair had relaxed. John sat in the near dark a long while, and when he spoke aloud because his throat wanted the feel of words, he said only the names of small, generous fires, hearth, taper, lantern, until he could say the candle to itself without the word God anywhere near it. Then the night came. It wore no name because clouds sheared the moon down to a smear that could not own itself. He went to the tunnel under the middle gate with men who had learned the shape of quiet. They carried no torches at first because the dark there had a shape of its own, and they did not want to bruise it yet. When they did light one, under a careful hand, the upper branches of the weirwood face on the gate seemed to stir, as if a breath had come through a room someone had thought sealed. John stood with his body full of patience that hurt like a bruise you cannot rub. He listened to the long silence of the old face. He felt the eyes be carved and not carved, and then, behind that, be something else altogether. He uncovered the candle and blew the small unfire to life with a breath he had learned from his own fear and from the boy in the roots. Caught as a shy thing will catch your glance when it loves you already. The basin here was set deep in the floor, fed by a thin thread of weeping that had nowhere to go and had dug itself a patient little path around the obsidian's teeth. John put his palm to the lip. The sting tasted of iron and snow. The note that answered made the hair on his forearms lift. It carried the scent of green despite the air's cold and the stone. He said the first line to the very last syllable, and then he bent his head over his own tongue and would not let it shape it yet. He breathed on the candle and on the basin, and the borrowed breath poured into the stone like fog, and the face on the gate changed for a heartbeat in a way no carver could make. It looked not kinder, not gentler, but more awake. Melisandre's shadow came then at the edge of the torch's light, her red beads a small, arrogant constellation in the black. He did not turn. He held the candle as Bran had told him, by calling it what it would not be afraid of. Flame, he said in his head, old and little hearth friend, taper, hold. It steadied against his palm like a bird finding a wrist it could trust. He felt her hand without touch. The air near him warmed a hair. She had always believed warmth meant agreement. He did not yield. This is not for your god, he said, allowed his voice to find the wall and sit on it. He has enough songs. This one is for the dead we do not want. You bind what should burn to a thing that should break, she said. You are a man in love with knots, and you will die tangling yourself. He did not look. He said the second line clear to the last curve and stopped it there. The wall answered. The face on the gate seemed, for one long beat, to narrow its eyes as if at sun, and a sound went through the old stones that could have been a sigh and could have been a warning. Jon felt his knees loosen and lock again. He covered the candle while it still wanted to be covered. He put his bloody palm to the old wood at the edge of the gate where hands had rested so often their track had made a shine. He felt approval, not like praise, like a check mark a teacher makes with charcoal in a column she rarely has cause to use. They came out into air with no names in it and stood a while under sky so dull it felt heavy. Ed looked as if he had held his breath too long and had to teach his lungs to start again. Leathers scrubbed his face with both hands and left a smear there that looked like paint. Melisandre watched them go with her arms folded and her beads cold and her lips align. When she smiled, because she could not stop herself, there was no heat in it. Back at the yard, a man ran up to them with a face like someone had cut his sleep from him with a dull knife. Riders from the west, he blurted. Shadow Tower sends. Giants moved in the mountains last night. They made a sound like men trying to remember a word. Jon felt the tiredness and the frost in his joints like a song with a rhythm that would not suit dancing. He put his glove back on. He looked east, where the sea had decided men were not worth talk for now. He looked west, where mountains set their shoulders and dared men to make them move. He looked up to the long weight of the wall. It hummed very faintly, like a thing that, having been taught a tune, played it to itself to keep from forgetting. One more, he said, not to Ed or Leathers or the man who had brought the message, not even to himself, to the stone under his boots and the ice beyond his eyes, to the breath in the basin that had learned their names and might learn to answer when called. One more, and then we tell it to sing. He went to the rookery. He wrote a letter to the Shadow Tower with words about beams and thaw and how the west road would be easier in 2 days. He had it sent with a bird that had shed 2 feathers in his hand as if paying some small price in advance. He rubbed his thumb over the stain the obsidian had left in his palm and watched the blood there turn to a brown memory. He sat with the candle wrapped and did not let it seduce him into unwrapping it. He said the old words in his head until their weight settled into a place where they would not slide and fall. Outside, men argued about bread. A boy laughed like a jar broken and then set together again badly. Someone sang one line of a song and forgot the second and hummed instead, and the humming suited the wall well enough. He slept when sleep ambushed him. He woke when Ghost put his great heavy head on Jon's chest as if to remind him that weight can be kindness. He did not dream of dragons that night. He dreamed of strings laid between stones, and he dreamed his fingers had calluses they had never had from playing, and he dreamed men walked under those strings and felt safer for their sound without knowing why. In the morning, he put his hands on the table, and the wood there felt warmer than it should, as if it had picked up a little of his blood and liked it. In the yard, snow fell in flakes so slow you could count them if you wanted and had time, which no one did. The men from the west waited, their horses with breath in great white sacks before them. They were mountain men by the set of their shoulders. One had a bit of blue thread caught in his beard and did not know it. They watched John watching them and waited for the words he had already written. He watched them watching him and had the sudden stupid desire to tell them something true and simple. Like bread is good when it's fresh. He said instead what men need. He sent men to harness. He sent for a pair of sledges to be made ready along the western road, and he sent Othel for nails and a man to carry them. He went inside to fetch the thing that wanted to be many things. A candle, a string, a way to speak to a far hot breath without asking it to come where it would hate, and he wrapped it in cloth again as if hiding it from eyes that could not see through cloth. He felt foolish and grateful in one motion. They went, another hush out of another yard. The wall kept their secret with the ease of a housewife who has kept much better ones. Men watched and did not see. Ghost trotted at John's side and then ahead and then fell back to bump John's knee with his shoulder as if to say, "Here, still." Ed complained just enough at the cold to make all the other silences seem well arranged. Leathers walked with his head a little down as if tasting the wind with his brow. The builders had hammers at their belts like men going to a wedding with knives tucked out of sight, because it's not that kind of wedding, but you never know. As they put the east behind them and the middle somewhere under their feet and the west ahead, the wall kept humming to itself, low and constant, and men who heard it found themselves walking in time without meaning to. Somewhere ahead of them, where mountains shouldered against the ice like beasts at a trough, a third basin waited with its teeth and its memory. Somewhere far away, a girl with soot hair taught a creature older than memory to answer when a sound called it. Somewhere under roots, a boy who loved heights watched and waited, and the ravens at his shoulders learned a new note they would carry when called. John walked and felt the old words move like a river under a crust of ice in him, alive and quiet and patient. Why? Ting for the last bending of his tongue. He would give it to them when the night lent them its namelessness and the mountains lent them their ears, and the wall, having been taught twice, would be ready to be taught the third time and to sing as it had been made to sing. Until then, he carried the candle and he carried the breath and he carried the long weight of cold on his shoulders the way a man carries a sleeping child, carefully not to wake it before the right bed is made.